Hello, everyone, and welcome to Midnight Whispers. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and slowly fall asleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin. My Nan died on her 73rd birthday. And even now, years later, the way it happened still feels unreal. Not dramatic in a loud way, not frightening, just quietly strange, like something that slipped between moments instead of fully happening in front of us. It's the kind of story that doesn't feel heavy when you tell it, but it stays with you long after, replaying itself in your head when you least expect it. In the weeks leading up to her death, Nan had been completely comatose, not drifting in and out, not waking for short moments, not squeezing hands or opening her eyes. She was just gone somewhere we couldn't reach. Machines breathed for her. Nurses checked her vitals. We sat beside her bed and spoke anyway, because that's what you do. You talk even when you're told it doesn't matter. You tell stories, you give updates, you say things you wish you'd said sooner. The doctors had been honest with us. They said she might not wake up again. There was no timeline, no certainty, just the slow acceptance settling over the family. We visited when we could, taking turns because the room was small and quiet, and too many people made it feel crowded and wrong. Every visit ended the same way. We said goodbye, even though we didn't know if it was really goodbye. We told her we loved her. We held her hand, and then we left. On our last visit, before her birthday, we stood around her bed for a while longer than usual. It was one of those moments where nobody wants to be the first to say it's time to go. Eventually, though, we did what we always did. We leaned close to her and spoke softly. Mom told her that we'd be back soon. Dad said we'd come again on her birthday. My sister and I echoed it, like it was a promise we could somehow make stick just by saying it out loud. We knew logically that she couldn't hear us. The nurses had told us that. The doctors had told us that. Still, we said it anyway. We'll come on your birthday. It felt important to say it, even if it was just for us. The morning of her birthday, we got up early. The plan was to drive the 2 hours to the hospital together as a family. No rushing, no stress, just a quiet trip to sit with her. Maybe play some music softly. Maybe talk. Maybe just be there. We weren't expecting anything to change. We weren't expecting a miracle. We just wanted to keep our word. We were almost ready to leave when the phone rang. Mom answered it, and before she even spoke, something in her face changed. It wasn't shock at first. It was confusion. Like she was trying to understand words that didn't quite make sense. She listened quietly, said a few short responses, and then hung up. Nan had died. The timing felt cruel and strange all at once. After weeks of waiting, weeks of sitting by her bedside, weeks of accepting that the end could come at any time, it happened on the exact morning we were supposed to see her. On her birthday, right before we left, we were still standing there, keys in hand, coats on, frozen in that moment where plans fall apart and nothing feels real anymore. Later, we learned what had happened that morning. After weeks of being completely unresponsive, Nan had suddenly sat up in her hospital bed. No warning, no slow return. Just sat up like someone waking from a deep sleep. The nurse on duty was startled but relieved. She'd seen this sort of thing before, though rarely. Sometimes people have moments of clarity at the end. Sometimes they rally unexpectedly. Nan looked at the nurse and asked for a cup of tea. That alone would have been strange enough. Tea had always been her thing. No matter what was happening, a cup of tea could make it feel manageable. Even hearing that detail later made it feel like her, like a small piece of normal, slipping through something that had been anything but normal. But she didn't stop there. She looked at the nurse and asked if he knew what day it was. He told her he didn't, addressing her politely, gently, like he had done countless times before. She smiled and told him it was her birthday. She said she was 73 years old that day. She spoke clearly, confidently, as if she hadn't been gone for weeks, as if nothing had been wrong at all. Then she told him that her daughter, her son-in-law, and her granddaughters were coming to visit her. She said they were going to have cake. The nurse responded kindly, like anyone would. He told her that sounded lovely. He said he'd go get her a cup of tea and help get her ready. And then he left the room. When he came back with the tea, Nan was dead. Just like that. No struggle, no call button, no alarm, just gone. When we were told that part of the story, it didn't make the loss harder exactly. It made it stranger, comforting in a way, but also deeply unsettling. She had been gone for weeks, unreachable. And then suddenly she was back just long enough to know what day it was. Just long enough to remember her birthday. Just long enough to say we were coming. And she was right. We were coming. It felt like she had woken up for that reason alone. Like something inside her had held on to that promise we'd made out loud in a quiet hospital room. Even if she couldn't hear us at the time, even if it didn't make sense medically, it felt like she knew. There's a term people use for moments like that. A rally, terminal lucidity, a final burst of clarity before death. Doctors can explain it in scientific terms, and maybe those explanations are correct. But explanations don't erase the emotional weight of it. They don't make it feel less personal. Nan didn't wake up confused. She didn't ask where she was. She didn't ask what year it was. She didn't talk about random memories or people from long ago. She knew exactly who she was, how old she was, what day it was, and who was coming to see her. That's the part that stays with me. Out of all the things she could have said, out of all the confusion that could have filled that moment, she spoke about her birthday and her family visiting. She spoke about cake, about something ordinary and joyful and familiar. Sometimes I imagine that moment from her point of view, sitting up in bed, the room probably quiet, the light soft. Maybe she felt better than she had in weeks. Maybe she felt normal for a moment. Maybe she felt ready. Other times, I imagine it from the nurse's point of view, leaving the room to get a cup of tea for a woman who had just woken up after weeks, probably thinking it was a good sign, probably hoping she might hold on a little longer. And then coming back to silence. I don't know which perspective feels heavier. After she died, people told us how peaceful it sounded, how lucky it was that she woke up at the end, how meaningful it was that it happened on her birthday. And maybe they were right. There is comfort in knowing she wasn't lost or confused at the end. There is comfort in knowing she knew we were coming. But there's also a quiet sadness in knowing we missed her by minutes. We never got to have that visit. We never got to sit with her on her birthday. There was no cake, no tea, just a drive that no longer needed to happen and a promise that had technically been kept, even if we weren't there in time. Sometimes I think about how life doesn't always give you closure in the way you expect. Sometimes it gives you something stranger, something that feels unfinished but also complete in its own way. Nan's death didn't feel like an ending tied neatly with a bow. It felt like a pause, a moment of awareness, a gentle exit. And every year when her birthday comes around, I think about that morning, about a woman who had been gone for weeks, who woke up just long enough to say, It's my birthday, and my family is coming to see me. And in a way, she was right. We just didn't make it in time. I worked as a CNA in a dementia unit, and even now I can say without hesitation that my first graveyard shift there was one of the most terrifying nights of my life. I had worked evenings before, and I thought I knew what to expect. Dementia units are already emotionally heavy places. The confusion, the repeating questions, the fear some residents live with every day. Nights are quieter, darker, slower. I told myself that was all it would be. Quiet work, routine checks, maybe a little loneliness. I was wrong. That night was my first time working the overnight shift, completely alone. No other CNAs, no nurses stationed directly on the unit. Just me, the residents, and a building that suddenly felt far too big once the lights dimmed and the doors locked. I remember telling myself to stay calm, to stay busy, and to treat it like any other shift. I had no idea how quickly that confidence would disappear. The night started with laundry. That was always the easiest way to pass time early in the shift. Folding clothes, sorting socks, listening to the hum of machines. The laundry room was tucked away down a short hallway with metal shelves stacked with detergent, soap bottles, and cleaning supplies. The lighting in there was never great, but it had always been enough. The first time the lights turned off, I didn't panic. I assumed it was a motion sensor or a faulty switch. Old buildings have wiring issues. I reached for the light switch, turned it back on, and went back to work. That's when I heard something hit the floor behind me. A bottle of soap had fallen off the shelf. I picked it up, put it back, and laughed nervously to myself. Now gravity happens, shelves get bumped. I hadn't felt myself hit anything, but I brushed it off. I stepped out of the room with a basket of laundry, dropped it off, and came back a few minutes later. As soon as I stepped back into the laundry room, the lights shut off again. This time, before I could even react, another bottle slid off the shelf and hit the floor, not tipped, not slowly falling. It looked like it had been pushed. My stomach tightened, but I still tried to rationalize it. Maybe the shelves weren't level. Maybe vibrations from the machines were enough to shift things. I turned the lights back on, gathered the soap, and finished what I was doing as quickly as I could. I didn't linger. I didn't want to be in that room longer than necessary. Every single time I went back into the laundry room that night, the same thing happened. The lights would shut off, and soap would fall off the shelves. Sometimes one bottle, sometimes two. Always after I entered. Never while I was standing still. It felt like something was reacting to me being there. By the time I finished the laundry, my nerves were already shot. The building felt different. Too quiet, but not peaceful. More like it was waiting. I moved on to my first set of rounds. Checking residents, repositioning them, changing briefs, making sure everyone was safe and comfortable. This part of the job was familiar, and I hoped it would ground me. The dementia unit was a long hallway with rooms on either side, dim night lights glowing softly near the floors. Most residents were asleep. Some murmured to themselves. Some stared at the ceiling. I was helping one resident, gently turning them and changing them. When it happened, the door flew open, not slowly, not creaking. It slammed open so hard it hit the wall and knocked a couple of pictures right off. Frames clattered to the floor, loud in the quiet hallway. I froze. My heart felt like it jumped into my throat. The residents startled too, looking at me with wide, confused eyes. I checked the hallway. No one was there. No draft. No open windows. The air felt still. I picked up the pictures, closed the door, and tried to calm both the resident and myself. I told myself it was pressure change, or someone down the hall opening another door. anything that made it make sense. I finished my rounds as fast as I safely could and went to the front desk area to wait before the next round. Sitting there alone with the lights dim and the unit quiet was when the fear really settled in. There was no distraction anymore, no task to focus on. That's when the door in the first hallway started opening and closing. At first, I thought a resident was wandering. That happens often in dementia units. I got up and walked down the hall. The door stopped moving the second I stepped into view. I checked the rooms. Everyone was in bed. No one was near the door. I went back to the desk. As soon as I sat down and turned my back, the door started again, opening, closing. Soft at first, then harder. The sound echoed down the hallway. This went on for a while. Every time I checked, it stopped. Every time I turned away, it started again. It felt deliberate, like something was playing with me, testing me. I remember standing there at one point, staring at the door, waiting for it to move while I watched. It didn't. The second I turned my back, it started again. I was exhausted by the time I started my next round, emotionally drained and on edge. That's when one resident stopped me. They were awake, sitting up slightly in bed, eyes wide. They told me there was a door opening and closing. My heart sank because I hadn't mentioned it to anyone. I told them everything was okay, that doors do that sometimes, and tried to soothe them. I helped them relax, adjusted their blankets, and spoke softly. Then they looked past me and shook their head. They said a man kept coming into their room. I turned slowly and showed them the room, the corners, the doorway, the shadows. I told them there was nothing there. I smiled, even though my hands were shaking. That's when they looked directly behind me into the dark space beyond the door. One said quietly that he was right behind me. I felt cold all over. I didn't turn around right away. I didn't want to see whatever my imagination might create. I finished calming them, reassured them again, and left the room as calmly as I could manage. Once I was out of sight, I leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. I told myself dementia causes hallucinations. I told myself residents see things that aren't there all the time. But it didn't feel like just that. The hours dragged on after that. I watched the clock constantly. Every sound made me jump. Around 5 in the morning, when the building should have been at its quietest, I started hearing footsteps, slow shuffling sounds moving down the hallway. Along with them, the unmistakable squeak of a walker. Anyone who has worked in elder care knows that sound. It's specific, rhythmic, familiar. I got up to check. The hallway was empty. No residents were awake. No one had left their room. I stood there listening. Silence. I turned around to head back, and the sound started again behind me. Shuffling feet, squeaky walker, moving steadily like someone doing the same routine they'd done 1,000 times before. I checked again. Nothing. This happened repeatedly until the sun began to rise. Each time the sound was clear. Each time there was no one there. By then I wasn't even trying to rationalize anymore. I just wanted the shift to end. When morning staff arrived, I didn't say much. I was tired, shaken, and unsure how to explain what I'd experienced without sounding ridiculous. A few days later, though, I mentioned the footsteps and the walker to another staff member. Their face changed immediately. They told me that there had been a resident who used to wake up every morning at 5 a.m. and shuffle down the hallway with their squeaky walker. It was part of their routine for years. They had passed away about a month before I started working there. That was the moment everything clicked into place. The laundry room, the doors, the footsteps, the way it all followed patterns, routines, repetition, just like the residents themselves. That building was old. People passed away there often. It wasn't a rare occurrence. Maybe something lingered, Maybe routines didn't end just because bodies did. I believe it was ghosts. I don't say that lightly. I didn't go into that job believing in things like that. But after that night, after everything I experienced alone in that unit, it's hard to believe otherwise. It felt like a welcome party. Not malicious, not violent, just present, letting me know I wasn't as alone as I thought. This isn't exactly something people usually talk about, and it isn't even something I was directly involved in, but it stayed with me longer than almost anything else I've experienced. The aftermath of a battle is terrifying in a way that's hard to explain to anyone who hasn't been there. Not loud, not dramatic, not cinematic. It's quiet, heavy, and deeply wrong. Like the world itself hasn't caught up to what just happened. This wasn't a firefight I took part in. We came across the site several hours after it was over. By then, the noise was gone. No gunfire, no shouting, no movement. Just the place where violence had happened, sitting there under the same sky as everything else, pretending to be normal. The first thing you notice is the air. It feels thick, almost stagnant. Like it's not moving properly anymore. Even if there's wind, it doesn't seem to touch the space the same way. It's hard to describe without sounding dramatic, but it feels like breathing something that doesn't quite belong inside you. Every breath feels heavier than the last. Then there's the smell. It's awful. Not just bad, not just unpleasant. It's layered, burnt metal. Blood, waste, smoke that's gone stale. Something sweet underneath it all that turns your stomach when you realize what it is. The smell sticks to your clothes, your hair, your skin. Long after you leave, you still feel like it's there, clinging to you. You can shower and scrub, but it doesn't completely go away, at least not right away. Your brain remembers it, even when your nose doesn't. What shocked me the most was how quiet everything was. After something violent, you expect noise or at least echoes of it, but instead, there's this unnatural silence. Not peaceful silence, not calm. It's the kind that feels forced, like everything is holding its breath. Even insects seem hesitant. Birds don't sing. Animals stay away. Standing there, you get hit with a sense of wrongness that's almost physical. It presses against you, crawls up your spine, raises the hair on your arms and the back of your neck. Every instinct you have starts screaming at you to leave, to get as far away from that place as possible. Not later, not after checking one more thing. Now. It's not fear in the way people usually think of fear. You're not scared of something jumping out at you. You're scared because the place itself feels hostile. Like it doesn't want you there. Like it knows you don't belong. The best way I can describe it is that the place feels like it sees you. And that sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud. I know that. Places don't have eyes. Ground doesn't watch people. But that's the feeling. Like the air itself is aware of you. Like the wrongness marks you. Like something has noticed you stepping into it. There's this oily, sick sensation that settles in your stomach and spreads outward. It's not panic exactly, but it's close. It's the same feeling you get when you realize you're being watched by something you can't see. Like standing in tall grass knowing there's a predator nearby, even if you don't know where it is yet. It feels like being hunted. Not actively chased, but evaluated. Weighed. Like something is deciding whether you matter or not. Whether you're prey or irrelevant. You find yourself scanning the shadows without knowing what you're looking for. Every movement catches your eye. Every sound, no matter how small, makes your muscles tense. And the strange thing is, it doesn't happen every time. That's what makes it worse. You can walk through places where terrible things happen and feel nothing but sadness or heaviness. You can visit areas where battles took place and only feel the weight of history. But sometimes, just sometimes, you step into a place and something is different, sharper, more alive in a way that feels wrong. This was one of those times. I don't believe in the supernatural, or at least I didn't. I've always leaned toward logic, stress responses, trauma, the human brain reacting to death and violence the way it's wired to. And a lot of that is probably true. There are real explainable reasons why places like that feel the way they do. But standing there, explanations didn't help. You feel exposed in a way that's hard to put into words. Like whatever that wrongness is, it doesn't care whether you were involved or not. It doesn't care that you're alive. It doesn't care that you're just passing through. You're there, and that's enough. I remember wanting to move faster, but also not wanting to draw attention to myself, even though there was nothing visibly there to notice me. It was an instinctive contradiction. Part of me wanted to run. Another part wanted to stay still and quiet, like movement might somehow make things worse. Your body reacts before your mind does. Your shoulders tense. Your jaw clenches. Your breathing changes. You feel alert in a way that's exhausting, like every nerve is firing at once. Time feels strange too. Minutes stretch. Seconds feel heavier than they should. At one point, I remember thinking that the place felt crowded even though it was empty. Not with people you could see, but with absence. With something left behind. Like echoes that never faded. Later, when we talked about it among ourselves, some of the guys admitted they'd felt it too. Not everyone, but enough that it wasn't just me. Some shrugged it off. Some joked about it. Others got quiet and changed the subject. What stuck with me most was a conversation we had with some of our African counterparts. We were talking late one night, and the subject came up naturally, the way heavy topics sometimes do when people are tired and honest. They told us that in their belief systems, demons sometimes come to battlefields after fighting is done. Not during the chaos, but after. They come to feed on the souls of the dead, to consume what's left behind once the bodies are still. They said that sometimes those entities can't tell the difference between the souls of the dead and the living. That sometimes the living are mistaken for something else. And that's when people feel watched. That's when people feel hunted. That's when a place feels wrong in a way that has nothing to do with memory or imagination. They didn't say it dramatically. They didn't try to scare us. They said it the way someone explains something obvious, like a rule of nature. At the time, I nodded politely. I didn't argue, but I didn't fully believe it either. It sounded like folklore, cultural explanations for trauma, a way of making sense of something that doesn't make sense. But standing there earlier that day in that place with that feeling crawling over my skin, their words echoed louder than I expected. I don't think I suddenly became a believer in demons that night. I still don't know what I believe, but on some level, a quiet part of me accepted that their explanation fit the feeling better than any scientific one I could come up with. Because the feeling wasn't just about death. It wasn't just sadness or grief or shock. It felt predatory, focused, like a tension without a face. There was no comfort in that place, no sense of closure, just the overwhelming impression that something had been torn open and not closed properly, like the boundary between things had been damaged. Eventually we left. Nothing followed us. Nothing happened. No dramatic ending. The feeling slowly faded as distance grew between us and the site. The air felt lighter again. Sounds returned. The world went back to behaving like the world. But the memory didn't fade the same way. Even now I can recall that sensation clearly. The weight in my chest, the urge to leave, the certainty that staying longer would have been a mistake, even if I couldn't explain why. I've been in dangerous situations since then. I've been scared. I've been under stress. I've felt adrenaline and fear and exhaustion. But that specific feeling, that sense of being seen by something you cannot see, is rare. That's why it stands out. I don't talk about it often. People either want neat explanations or dramatic stories. This is neither. It's just an experience that sits in the gray area between belief and disbelief. Maybe it was psychological. Maybe it was my brain reacting to the aftermath of violence. Maybe the human mind is better at sensing danger than we give it credit for, even when the danger is no longer physical. Or maybe some places really do hold on to things. Not memories in the poetic sense, but something heavier. Something that doesn't fade easily. I don't know. What I do know is that sometimes, after a battle, the danger doesn't feel over just because the shooting has stopped. Sometimes the quiet is worse. Sometimes the emptiness feels full. And sometimes the strongest instinct you have is the simple, overwhelming need to leave without ever fully understanding what you're leaving behind. Sorry to interrupt for just a moment. If you're new here, consider subscribing to Midnight Whispers for daily true horror stories that stay with you long after they're told, quietly unsettling and meant for the late hours. You can also turn on notifications so you're always here when a new story arrives and the night begins to stir again. Now, let's continue. There's a bar and grill in a small town near me that most people drive past without thinking twice about it. From the outside, it looks like a lot of old neighborhood places do. Brick building, modest sign, nothing flashy. If you didn't know its history, you'd never guess there was anything unusual about it at all. But almost everyone who grew up around there knows one important detail. It used to be a funeral home. Not just briefly either. It operated as a funeral home for years, long enough that generations of locals remember attending wakes, viewings, and services there. Eventually the business closed, the building was sold, renovated, and reopened as a bar and grill. Tables replaced pews. The smell of food replaced the smell of flowers and chemicals. On the surface, it was just another case of an old building being repurposed. But some things don't disappear just because the walls get painted. One of the most unsettling parts of the building was the basement. That was where the cremation chamber had been. After the renovation, that room became a prep and dry storage area. Shelving went up. Food supplies were stored there. It was practical, out of sight, and convenient. But it was still underground, still windowless, still cut off from the noise and warmth of the main floor. I've worked in restaurants my entire adult life, and I can say this with confidence. Basements are always creepy. Even in normal buildings, even brand new places, there's something about going downstairs alone that never feels quite right. The lighting is usually harsh or dim. The air feels heavier. Sounds echo strangely. Your footsteps feel louder than they should. You're always aware of how far you are from everyone else. Now take that feeling and add the knowledge that the space used to be part of a funeral home. I never worked at this particular place myself, but I've known a lot of people who did. Over the years, friends of friends, co-workers from other restaurants, even random conversations at bars somehow drifted back to that building. And without exception, every single person I've ever talked to who worked there had a story. Not one, not maybe, every single one. What's interesting is how consistent those stories are. During slow shifts, when there were only a few staff members working, people avoided the basement whenever they could. If someone needed something from storage, they'd ask another person to go with them. If no one was available, they'd put it off until later. It wasn't written into policy. No manager ever said, "Don't go down there alone." It was just something people learned quickly, almost instinctively. When the restaurant was busy, though, no one worked in the basement at all. The place could be absolutely packed. Tables full, bars shoulder to shoulder, kitchen slammed, orders flying out nonstop. In those moments, every staff member was needed upstairs. The prep room downstairs would be completely empty. No cooks, no dishwashers, no managers grabbing supplies, nothing. And that's when things would happen. People sitting at the bar, directly above the basement prep room, would start to notice noises. At first, they'd assume it was normal restaurant chaos. Kitchens are loud, dishes get dropped, pans get slammed, but then they'd realize something didn't add up. The noises were coming from directly below them, loud, metallic banging, the unmistakable sound of pots and pans being knocked around. Not a single clatter, but repeated noise, like someone was moving things aggressively, like someone was working down there. Customers would comment on it casually at first. They'd ask the bartender if someone was prepping downstairs. The bartender would say no. Someone else would ask if the kitchen was in the basement. Again, no. Eventually, someone would check. A manager would head downstairs, usually already annoyed, expecting to find someone screwing around or making unnecessary noise. They'd flip on the lights, walk through the prep area, and find everything exactly as it should be. Pots stacked neatly, pans hanging where they belonged, shelves untouched. No sign that anyone had been down there at all. The noise would stop the moment someone went to look. Then, once everyone was back upstairs and the basement was empty again, it would start all over. This didn't happen once, or twice, or during one specific period. People have been talking about it for close to 30 years now. Different owners, different staff, different customers, same stories. Some workers claimed they heard footsteps pacing in the basement when no one was there. Slow, deliberate steps, not the random creaks of an old building settling. Others said they heard drawers opening and slamming shut. A few said they heard voices, muffled and indistinct, like someone speaking just out of range of understanding. One cook told me that early in his shift, before the dinner rush, he went down to grab supplies. He was alone. As soon as he reached the bottom of the stairs, he felt like he wasn't. He said the air felt colder down there, heavier, like it pressed against his chest. He hurried, grabbed what he needed, and turned to leave. On his way back up the stairs, he heard something metallic hit the floor behind him. He didn't turn around. He said the sound followed him part way up the stairs, like someone had thrown something hard enough to bounce. When he reached the top, the noise stopped. He refused to go back down for the rest of the night. Another server told me she once heard the banging start while she was closing the bar. It was late. Only a few customers remained. The noise was loud enough that people turned in their seats to look toward the floor, confused. She said it sounded angry, not playful, not accidental, like frustration being taken out on metal and shells. She said she felt embarrassed more than scared at first because customers were staring. She went to get a manager. The manager went downstairs. Silence. Nothing out of place, no explanation. When the manager came back up and told everyone it was fine, the noise started again almost immediately. That was the night she quit. What makes the stories unsettling isn't just the noises themselves. Old buildings make noise. Anyone who's worked in one knows that. Pipes knock, floors creak, air ducts pop. But people who work in restaurants know the difference between normal building sounds and the sound of kitchen equipment being handled by human hands. Pots don't randomly slam themselves against each other. Pans don't lift and fall repeatedly without cause. Shelves don't rattle in patterns that resemble work being done. And there was always a pattern. The basement only acted up when it was empty. It only made noise when no one was down there. And it always stopped when someone went to check. That alone is enough to make people uneasy. Add to that the knowledge of what the building used to be. And suddenly, the imagination fills in the gaps, whether you want it to or not. People know what happened in funeral homes. They know what rooms like that were used for. They know how much death passed through those walls. Some workers joked about it to cope. Gallows humor comes naturally in restaurant culture. They'd say things like, "The old tenants are mad, we're too busy to cook for them," or "Someone forgot to feed the ghosts." But those jokes never lasted long. Not when you're closing late at night and the building is quiet and you're the last one locking up. Several people told me that being alone in the building after hours was the worst part. Once the music was off and the lights were dimmed, the place felt different. The laughter and conversation that made it feel alive during the day were gone. The walls felt closer. Sounds carried farther. You became aware of every little noise, and sometimes there were noises you couldn't explain. One former bartender told me that while counting the till late one night, she heard what sounded like someone moving chairs in the dining room. She assumed another staff member was finishing up. She called out. No answer. She walked through the dining area and found every chair exactly where she'd left it. When she returned to the bar, the noise started again, this time louder. She left without finishing her paperwork and came back the next day with someone else to do it. What's interesting is that no one ever described seeing anything clearly. No full-bodied apparitions, no dramatic figures standing in doorways. It was always sound. Presence. Movement without a source. The feeling of activity happening where there shouldn't have been any. Almost like whatever was there didn't need to be seen to be known. Locals talk about it casually now, like it's just part of the building's identity. Oh yeah, that place is haunted. They say it the same way you'd say a place has bad parking or slow service. It's just a fact that's been accepted over time. New staff members usually learn about it the same way. Not through warnings, but through experience. Their first solo trip to the basement. Their first shift when the banging starts. Their first moment standing at the bar while customers ask what's going on downstairs and they don't have an answer. Some last year's working there. Others don't make it through a month. What stuck with me all these years isn't any single story, but the consistency of them. 30 years is a long time for rumors to survive unchanged. Stories usually grow, shrink, or morph with retelling. Details blur, exaggerations creep in. But these stories haven't changed much at all. Basement, empty, noise, pots and pans, silence when checked, repeat. I still hear people bring it up sometimes, even now. Someone will mention they worked there years ago, and someone else will immediately ask, "Did you ever hear the basement?" The answer is always yes. I don't know what causes it. Maybe the building has structural quirks that amplify certain sounds in a way that mimics activity. Maybe pressure changes or vibrations from upstairs trigger something downstairs. There could be explanations that make sense on paper. But when dozens of people, over decades, all describe the same experience, it stops feeling like coincidence. Some places never fully let go of what they were. You can repaint the walls, change the furniture, rename the rooms, and fill them with noise and life. But underneath it all, the history is still there. And sometimes, especially when things get quiet or crowded or chaotic, that history seems to remind people of itself. That bar and grill still operates. People still eat there, drink there, laugh there. Life goes on above ground. But beneath it, in that basement that no one wants to work in, the stories linger. And judging by how long people have been telling them, They're not going anywhere anytime soon. The day before my dad passed away, he kept saying something that didn't make sense at the time, but now feels impossible to ignore. He said it to me, and he said it to the nurses too, over and over, calmly, without fear. He kept telling us that he was going home tomorrow. His kidneys were failing, and everyone knew what that meant. The doctors didn't say it out loud in blunt terms, but it was understood. There wasn't going to be a recovery. We were already in that strange space where you're no longer hoping for a cure, just for comfort, just for time, just for as little pain as possible. When he said he was going home tomorrow, I assumed he was confused. That happens near the end. People talk about places from their past or mix memories together or say things that don't line up with reality. I gently reminded him that he was already in the hospital, that home wasn't an option right now. The nurses tried to redirect him too, but he wasn't agitated. He wasn't scared. He wasn't asking questions. He was certain. He said it with a kind of confidence that made you pause, even if you didn't believe it. Not desperate, not wishful, just factual. Like someone talking about plans they already had arranged. I'm going home tomorrow, he said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. The next day, he died. At the time, I didn't connect those words to what happened. Not fully. Grief has a way of narrowing your focus. Everything becomes about surviving the moment you're in. The hours blur together. You move through the motions because you have to, not because you understand what's happening. After he passed, the house felt different immediately. Not in a dramatic way. There were no cold drafts or slamming doors right away. It was more subtle than that. The kind of difference you feel more than you see. The quiet felt heavier. The rooms felt fuller, even when they were empty. Not long after, I started having very vivid dreams about him. These weren't the fuzzy, half-forgotten dreams that fade as soon as you wake up. These were clear, detailed, real. In the dreams, he wasn't sick. He wasn't in pain. He was just there, in my house, sitting in familiar places, walking through rooms like he always had. Sometimes he didn't even speak. Sometimes he did. But the overwhelming feeling in every dream was that he was present, not imagined. When I woke up from those dreams, I didn't feel the usual sadness you expect after dreaming about someone who's gone. I felt calm, comforted, almost reassured, like I'd just spent time with him. Then things started happening when I was awake. At first it was small things, sounds I could explain away if I wanted to. I'd hear something move in another room, a soft thud, a shift, the kind of noise you might blame on the house settling. I'd hear footsteps upstairs when I knew I was home alone. Slow, familiar steps, not hurried, not heavy. I told myself it was grief, that my brain was filling in the gaps left behind by his absence, that I was hyper-aware of sounds because I missed him. All of that made sense logically. And I tried to hold on to those explanations because they were safe. But the sounds kept happening. I would be sitting downstairs and hear someone walking overhead, moving from one end of the hallway to the other. I would pause, listening, waiting for the sound to stop. Sometimes it did. Sometimes it didn't. I checked more than once just to reassure myself. The upstairs would be empty. No open windows, no pets moving around. Nothing out of place. It wasn't constant. It didn't feel chaotic or threatening. It felt familiar. After a while, I stopped being afraid of it. The fear never fully took hold, and that in itself felt important. If I truly believed something bad was happening, I think my body would have reacted differently. Instead, I felt accompanied. Eventually, I reached a point where I was confident it was him. That sounds strange to say out loud. I know how it sounds. But it wasn't a sudden realization. It was something that built slowly over time. The dreams, the sounds, the feeling of presence, and the memory of him saying he was going home. I started talking to him. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. The way you talk to someone you know is listening. I'd say his name sometimes. I'd say I missed him. I'd tell him about my day, about small things, normal things. Things I would have told him if he were still alive. And the activity continued. If anything, it felt more settled once I acknowledged it. The house didn't feel tense. It felt lived in, like it used to. At some point, though, something shifted. I realized that as comforting as it was, it also meant he hadn't let go yet. Or maybe he was lingering because I hadn't. Grief isn't just sadness. Sometimes it's attachment so strong you don't even realize you're holding on. I started telling him that it was okay. I told him that he didn't need to stay, that I was going to be okay, that he didn't have to worry about me anymore, that I loved him, but I understood if he needed to go. Those were hard things to say, even when you know someone is gone. Giving them permission to leave feels like losing them all over again. But something in me knew it was necessary. I told him that if he was still here because he was worried, he didn't need to be. That if he was waiting for something, he didn't have to wait anymore. That it was okay to let go. Not long after that, the dream stopped. The sound stopped too. No more footsteps upstairs. No more unexplained movement. The house went back to being just a house. At first, I felt relief. Then I felt something else that surprised me. I missed it. I missed the dreams. I missed the feeling that he was nearby. I missed talking to him and feeling like he might hear me. There was comfort in it, even though I knew it wasn't meant to last. Once it was gone, the finality of his death felt more real than it had before. But along with that sadness came something gentler. Peace. The house felt calm in a different way, not full, but settled. The heaviness lifted. The quiet became normal again instead of tense. It felt like whatever unfinished business had been, there was resolved. Looking back now, I think about what he said the day before he died, that he was going home tomorrow. At the time, we thought he meant the house, or maybe some confused version of it. Now I'm not so sure. Maybe he knew he wasn't talking about a physical place. Maybe home meant something else entirely, something beyond us. I don't know if what I experienced was truly him, or just my mind processing loss in the only way it knew how. I don't know where the line is between grief and something more. And honestly, I don't think it matters as much as people think it does. What matters is how it felt. It felt loving. It felt protective. It felt familiar. It didn't feel frightening or wrong. And when it ended, it didn't feel abrupt or violent. It felt complete. I like to think that once he knew I would be okay, he was able to move on, that he found whatever home he was talking about, that he's at peace now. And even though I miss those moments, those dreams, that quiet companionship, I wouldn't call them a haunting. I'd call them a goodbye. The day before my dad passed away, he kept saying the same thing over and over again. And at the time, I didn't realize how much those words would stay with me. He told me, and he told every nurse who came into the room, that he was going home tomorrow. Not in a confused or rambling way. Not like someone lost in memory or drifting between thoughts. He said it calmly, clearly, with a certainty that didn't leave much room for doubt in his own mind. His kidneys were failing, and by that point everyone knew what that meant. The doctors had explained it gently but honestly. There wasn't a path back from where he was. We weren't talking about recovery anymore. We were talking about comfort, dignity, and time, even though we didn't know how much of that time was left. The room had that quiet heaviness that hospital rooms get near the end, where conversations soften and every sound feels too loud. When he said he was going home tomorrow, I assumed it was confusion. I think that's what everyone assumed. End-of-life confusion happens, and people say things that don't quite line up with reality. Sometimes they talk about their childhood homes. Sometimes they talk about places or people long gone. I tried to gently correct him at first, reminding him where he was, telling him he was safe. The nurses did the same, smiling softly, redirecting him without arguing. But he didn't argue back either. He just kept saying it. I'm going home tomorrow. There was no anxiety in his voice, no urgency, no sadness. If anything, there was peace in the way he said it, like he was talking about a plan that had already been settled. He wasn't asking if he could go home. He wasn't hoping. He was stating a fact. At the time, I didn't know what to do with that. Part of me wanted to believe he meant something hopeful, something possible. Another part of me was already bracing for what we all knew was coming. I told myself it was just his mind preparing him in its own way. He passed the next day. The moment itself felt unreal, like time slowed down just enough for me to notice every detail, but not enough to understand any of it. One moment he was there, breathing shallowly. The next there was a stillness that felt too large for the room. After weeks of decline, it still felt sudden, final in a way nothing else ever had. In the days after his death, everything blurred together. Arrangements, phone calls, paperwork, condolences, people asking how I was doing, and me answering automatically without really thinking about it. Grief didn't arrive all at once. It came in waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes overwhelming, sometimes delayed until I was alone and not expecting it. It wasn't long after that when the dreams started. They weren't the kind of dreams you forget as soon as you wake up. They were vivid in a way that made them feel almost separate from normal dreaming. In them, my dad was in my house, not sick, not weak, just there, sitting in rooms he'd never actually sat in while alive, but acting as if he belonged there all the same. Sometimes he talked, sometimes he didn't. Sometimes we just existed in the same space. What struck me most was how real it felt. Not emotionally symbolic, but physically present. I could see him clearly. His expressions were familiar. His movements were natural. I would wake up from these dreams feeling like I'd actually spent time with him, not like I'd imagined him. Instead of waking up crying or shaken, I felt calm, comforted, almost reassured. That confused me. I expected the dreams to hurt, to reopen the wound, but they didn't. They felt like visits. Then things started happening when I was awake. At first, it was easy to explain away. Small sounds, a faint movement, something shifting in another room. Houses make noise, especially at night, especially when you're grieving and your senses feel sharper than usual. I told myself that was all it was, but the sounds continued. I would be home alone and hear something move upstairs. Footsteps, slow and steady, not rushed, not heavy. The kind of footsteps you recognize without thinking about it. I would pause, listening. Trying to convince myself it was just the house settling or pipes expanding. Sometimes I'd even laugh quietly at myself for being on edge, but it kept happening. I checked more than once, going upstairs to look, fully expecting to feel silly when I found nothing. The rooms would be empty, the house quiet. No open windows, no pets, no explanation. When I went back downstairs, sometimes the sounds would start again. Other times they wouldn't. It didn't feel threatening. That's what stood out the most. If I had felt scared, I think I would have shut down immediately, convinced myself it was stress or imagination. But I didn't feel fear. I felt familiarity, like someone moving through a space they knew well. Over time, a thought formed in my mind that I didn't want to acknowledge at first. That it was him. That my dad had come home. That idea didn't arrive suddenly. It wasn't a dramatic realization. It grew slowly, layered over the dreams, the sounds, the memories of him saying he was going home tomorrow. Eventually, it stopped feeling like a question, and they started feeling like an understanding. I began talking to him. Not because I thought it would make the activity stop, and not because I wanted attention or answers. It felt natural. I'd speak softly, sometimes out loud, sometimes just under my breath. I'd say his name. I'd tell him I missed him. I'd talk about my day, about small things that didn't matter but mattered at the same time. I told him I knew it was him. Nothing dramatic happened after that. No surge in activity. No sudden silence either. If anything, the house felt more settled, more familiar, like it used to feel before he passed. The dreams continued. The sounds continued. It felt like he was there quietly, not intruding, not making himself obvious, just existing alongside me. That lasted longer than I expected. Weeks turned into months. The grief changed shape, as grief does, becoming less sharp but more constant. The presence remained, and I grew used to it. It became part of my new normal. As strange as it sounds, there was comfort in it. It felt like he hadn't fully left yet, like there was still a connection that hadn't been severed. But eventually something shifted in me. I realized that while it comforted me, it might mean he hadn't fully let go. Or maybe I hadn't. It's hard to say where that line exists. Grief binds people together in strange ways, even across the boundary of death. I started wondering if he was staying because he was worried about me, because he didn't think I was ready to be alone. That thought hurt in a different way. I didn't want him lingering because of me. I didn't want him stuck in between because I couldn't accept his absence. Loving someone doesn't always mean holding on. Sometimes it means knowing when to let go. So I started telling him that it was okay. I told him he didn't need to stay, that I was going to be okay, even if it didn't always feel like it. That I loved him, but I understood if he needed to move on, that he didn't have to watch over me anymore, that he didn't need to worry. Those were some of the hardest things I've ever said. There's a strange finality in giving someone permission to leave, even when they're already gone. It feels like closing a door you're not sure you're ready to close. But something in me knew it was the right thing to do. Not long after that, the dreams stopped. The sounds stopped too. No more footsteps upstairs, no more unexplained movement. The house became quiet again in the ordinary way. At first, that quiet felt jarring, empty, too still. The comfort I hadn't realized I relied on was suddenly gone. And to my surprise, I missed it. I missed the dreams. I missed feeling like he was nearby. I missed talking to him and feeling like he could hear me. Losing that presence felt like losing him all over again, but in a softer, slower way. At the same time, something else settled in its place. Peace. The house felt lighter, calmer. The quiet no longer felt tense or expectant. It felt resolved. like something unfinished had finally reached its end. The grief didn't disappear, but it changed. It became something I could carry instead of something that overwhelmed me. I think back often to what he said the day before he died, that he was going home tomorrow. At the time, we thought he meant a physical place, or that his mind was confused. Now, I don't think that's what he meant at all. Maybe home wasn't a house or a hospital room. Maybe it was something else entirely. Somewhere he was ready to go. Somewhere he felt at peace. I don't know whether what I experienced was truly him or my mind's way of processing loss. I don't know where grief ends and something else begins. I don't know if there's a clear line between memory, love, and presence. What I do know is how it felt. It felt gentle. It felt loving. It felt protective. It didn't feel dark or frightening. And when it ended, it didn't feel abrupt or wrong. It felt complete. I like to believe that once he knew I would be okay, he was able to go where he needed to go. That he found the home he was talking about. That he's at peace now. And even though I miss those moments, those dreams, that quiet sense of not being alone, I don't think of it as something sad or scary. I think of it as a goodbye that took its time. If you're still here, then these stories didn't simply fade away. They settled in. Every story you heard tonight came from real moments, real people, and real situations where something felt off or nearly went wrong. If you want to keep exploring stories that linger in your thoughts long after the night grows quiet, consider subscribing to Midnight Whispers. There are more stories waiting in the dark, and not all of them let you leave in time.